At the time of recording, the Academy Awards are tonight. The Oscars. Andrew, how do you feel about the Academy Awards or award shows in general? Do you tune in very often? Do you follow these things?
No.
No interest? No, why is that? Real quick, I don't watch award shows either, but I'm a little... I want to break this down a little bit because obviously I love movies. You love movies. We're passionate about filmmaking, but I'm not drawn to award shows.
I like seeing certain people get rewarded for their efforts. I can't say that I don't enjoy, like, when somebody you really like wins the Oscar, because, it's still... let me phrase it this way, I guess. I have no real interest in watching them, but I'm also not one of those people that's like, oh, the Oscars, screw the Oscars, they're terrible, it's just a popularity contest with a bunch of out-of-touch people that don't actually like film, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm not one of those people. I don't have the energy to care that much. Yeah. I got my own problems. But I rarely tune in. Like, I know I have friends that still do, like, the Oscar parties. They like them. And, like, this year, I'm hoping there's some people I like that take home some naked man statues. I really hope so. Because everybody's dream. But it's like, I know my boy Ray Fiennes is up for some. There's some really great movies that are out there. I hope Demi Moore for The Substance takes one home. I'd love to see that. But at the same time, I just have stuff to do.
Sure.
I just have things that I gotta do. But also I just don't. I just told you, I forgot Elimination Chamber was on last night, so I didn't even watch that live. Like, I have no barometer for when things are happening these days. So I'm just trying to hang on, man.
Similar to a lot of... I mean, if I'm not going to do a deep dive into, like, why I'm not big into the Academy Awards, and I just don't, I feel like I would come across very cynical if I did that, and that's not the point of our podcast. I just haven't been into it. But I will say, I just found out, like, I think 2 days ago, that Conan O'Brien is the host this year, whom I love.
Yep.
I think I'm going to tune in, at least for a little bit, maybe for the big ones, or, opening monologue and stuff. So I guess we'll report back, even though this episode's probably dropping, like, 2 weeks after the Oscars. Yeah. I mean, by the time I tell you guys what I thought about it, we'll be like a month out. But that's just the nature of podcasting. But hey, we got a show to do. Let's bring in that theme song.
We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them. To the rest.
Hello and welcome to Best of the Rest. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined as always by my well-meaning co-host, Andrew Williams. Say something to the listeners, Andrew.
Something to the listeners.
Each week, we take a second look at a movie that was poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's SNL-ish month, and this week we are talking the 1995 film Tommy Boy. Andrew, I wish we had spent more time coming up with a better name for this month, but SNL-ish, I guess that tells you everything you need to know about it. I mean, last week we covered Billy Madison, right? Which is a movie about a business owner that's retiring and wants to pass his business on to his dim-witted son, but the kid they feel like they must prove they're worthy of running the business, and now we're talking about Tommy Boy.
See funny how that is, isn't it?
Yeah, funny, right? Honestly, I did not even realize the similarities until I was sitting down and watching this movie, and I was like, this is almost the same conceit here, but of course, the way he goes about proving his worth is a bit different, and some other differences as well. But Andrew, what I want to ask you is, what is your history with this movie, Tommy Boy? Did you watch it much growing up? Was it in your rotation? Did you see it as a kiddo? What do we got?
I definitely saw it in bits and pieces when I was growing up because, you know, it was hard not to. Chris Farley was at, you know, the peak of his powers right around this time. Don't think I saw it in theaters. Don't really think this was something my parents were thinking about. But it definitely showed up on TV. And then, you know, once you get to high school, college, you start buying your own movies and stuff. You have a copy that you revisit every few months, and it's like a warm blanket. So, yeah.
Yeah, similar. Definitely one I watched a lot as a kid. It's not one for whatever. It's not like Dumb and Dumber where like I just continued to watch it my entire life and always had a copy of it. I actually hadn't watched this movie beginning to end, and I mean probably since I caught it on cable, which had to have been 25 years ago. So it's been a long time since I watched it beginning to end, but saw it a ton as a kiddo. Chris Farley, I've always had a soft spot for. I've never been much of an SNL guy. Like I never stayed up late and watched it live on Saturday nights, but just being in culture, you just pick up on, you know, whether it's a hot skit that everyone's talking about at school the next day, or these days, you know, it goes viral and you catch it on social media, YouTube or whatever. You're going to come across, you can be exposed to SNL even if you're not watching the show live. And Chris Farley, then and probably still to this day, my favorite cast member, as long as we're talking about like the work they do on SNL. Will Forte might be my favorite overall, but mainly because of what he's done after SNL. But at any rate, yeah, always a huge fan. I remember renting his best of DVD a number of times from Blockbuster. You know, whether it's this motivational speaker or I really love when he's El Nino, which I think is just such a simple sketch, but he crushes it. Yeah, I think he's one of those people that is just insanely effortlessly funny, or he always made it look effortless. Effortless to him. I mean, he's putting in a lot of work and energy constantly. But yeah, whether it was this, Black Sheep, Beverly Hills Ninja, I mean, I watched them all a ton. Always a huge fan. Me and my brother were super bummed when we heard the news whenever he passed away. We'll talk more about Chris Farley specifics later, but needless to say, always a big fan of Tommy Boy. I was excited to dive into it this month, but let's set the stage here. The movie is released March 31st, 1995. It was made on a budget of $20 million at the box office. It brings in $32.7 million. One of those things where they're making up their money on home video, as is sort of the business model at the time. Critically, can't say it's well reviewed, holds just a 39% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. Critics weren't exactly singing its praises at the time. However, audience score, 90%. And I am not at all surprised to see that split. And, you know, we went through a Big Animal Month, and we're constantly surprised by how low those audience scores were, because we expected to see more like this. Like, these are fan favorite type movies, and it was a little perplexing to see the scores last month, but so far this month we're seeing a bit more, you know, what we expected. The audiences showing some love for these classics.
Yeah, I think it's actually both Billy Madison and Tommy Boy are the Rotten Tomatoes scores for critics are very similar. I think Tommy Boy's at a 39, Billy Madison's at a 41. I personally would switch those. Big difference. But
Okay.
But like Billy Madison comes in at a 79, but like I said, Tommy Boy comes in at a 90%. And I don't know if that's kind of like part of just the fact that Chris Farley's body of work ends up being so limited, adds a level of deeper nostalgia for it. But
I mean, this is the Chris Farley movie. I listed a few of them, but like this is
the one.
Yeah.
And it, you know, the joke being that literally Black Sheep is just Tommy Boy 2
trying to do this again. Yeah.
Because literally he's got in that one, it's just his older brother that is running for a governor spot who needs to be upright, and Tommy and Chris Farley plays the wild, rambunctious younger brother who keeps inadvertently making him look bad. It's a very similar vibe.
Yeah, goes on a road trip with David Spade and hijinks ensue.
An excuse. All it is an excuse for him to hang out with David Spade. That is literally just all Black Sheep is. This one did well enough, I guess, financially that they were like, we're going to do it again. And so, anyway, that one with added Gary Busey for all of your giant teeth purposes. Yeah, this one, again, a wide swing. You're looking at a 50% swing. Still not a Grandma's Boy level swing. I don't know that any of these movies will quite get there. But yeah, this is, I wouldn't say a Big Animal Month I was expecting, 90% for like Lake Placid, but I thought it would be more than what it was. So we're definitely seeing a little bit more of that. Critics and the pools, admittedly, here, like Billy Madison was off of 49 reviews, Tommy Boy off of 44. Those are obviously much smaller pools of reviews than things usually do. But it is still, a general consensus, and then those audience scores just jumping way back up. These things are, I don't want to say it's all nostalgia. I don't think that's fair. But I think these movies, especially for people of our age, were pretty formative things that they still look back on very fondly. So,
the movie's written by the writing team of husband and wife Bonnie and Terry Turner. Now, they're probably most known for their work in television as creators of the shows Third Rock from the Sun and That 70s Show. They were writers on SNL for a time, which is how they get involved with this creative crew. In fact, they are alum of the show because we talked about them previously when we covered Coneheads, as they wrote that movie as well, which also had a young Chris Farley in a supporting role.
Yeah, they've got a pretty wide career of things that we've definitely, like, they were writers on Coneheads. I'm sure we talked about this on the Coneheads episode, but Wayne's World 2, the Brady Bunch movie, Tommy Boy, and then obviously spinning off into things like Third Rock from the Sun and then That 70s Show, kind of possibly being their two kind of most notable efforts on television. But yeah, and they were writers from the late 80s to the early 90s, and actually writers on the first Wayne's World 2. So, like, it just, a career that speaks for itself, honestly. Like, it's a lot of that 90s peak stuff that I remember watching. Some of these things are extremely clever, like the Brady Bunch movie. You and I have both sung the praises of the Brady Bunch movies, just as how kind of meta and self-aware it is before that's really a thing. Like, it's a deconstruction of the Brady Bunch before deconstructing things like that was really a thing. And it makes for a deeply entertaining movie. Obviously things like Wayne's World, spinning out of SNL, stuff like that. Yeah, it is a career that speaks for itself, and I actually didn't remember that they wrote this. So, yeah.
The movie's directed by Peter Siegel, and he directed one movie before this. That would be Naked Gun 33 1/3, which, in my brain, all three Naked Gun movies are all classics. I remember jokes from all of them. I feel like if I were to really revisit them with a critical eye, maybe I'd see a drop-off in quality, but I don't know. I love everything from Police Squad and everything spun out of it, so maybe I'll just leave the memories alone. But goes on to have a very fruitful career after this. Let's see. He goes on to direct Anger Management, 50 First Dates, The Longest Yard. Wait a minute. We've got somebody that's in the Adam Sandler crew again. Said it before, we'll say it again, Andrew. Good work if you can get it. I do want to acknowledge that he directed Get Smart, though, which I think, speaking of movies based on old TV shows that kind of reinvent them for a new audience, I think Get Smart is fantastic. I've always loved that one. And also directs Grudge Match, which is the boxing movie with De Niro and Stallone. Andrew, have you had a chance to watch that one yet?
I did end up watching it off of your recommendation. It was fine.
Yeah, to be fair, maybe you'll remember, I didn't say it was a great movie or anything.
No, we didn't.
But I just the concept.
Like Hereditary. Sorry, I just, the layup for Hereditary was there. But yeah, obviously the joke there is it's Rocky versus Raging Bull. That's the point. The movie knows it. And yeah,
it's just nice. It's just nice to see.
It's a perfectly fine movie. And then he recently directed the Dave Bautista vehicles My Spy and My Spy: The Eternal City. So
yeah, the Dave Bautista movie where it's like is there a word for this? Like the kindergarten cop, the pacifier, the big action star that does the kid movie where they take care of a little kid with the brat.
I don't know if there's a term for it, but
it's a very specific trope. But
Yeah.
this is one that I had never heard of, and I was surprised to see that they've made 2 of them. It looks like they
they're
go.
Amazon things.
Yeah, there's a box office for the first one, but it had to have been a limited release. It's very small, but yeah, it seems like a straight to streaming deal there.
Anyway, yeah, an interesting career by Peter Segal. There's actually a Naked Gun Easter egg in this movie when Richard turns on the TV at the hotel when he's creeping on the girl outside who's creeping on everyone at the hotel. I don't know. That's a weird scene, and I don't know why it's here. But
Because it was the
on
90s,
TV,
Andrew. That's why it's here.
On the TV, it's like a pay-per-view, and it lists like Naked Gun 33 1/3. The final insult is like available for purchase to watch. Yeah, the Naked Gun movies are, first off, I've sung the praises of Police Squad before, I'm sure. Police Squad is fantastic. It's actually wild to me how many people that have seen Naked Gun that don't know Police Squad exists.
I mean, I didn't know for a long time. I didn't know. I was an adult.
Like it says from the files of Police Squad, but I don't think people know what that means. Like they don't. They think it's just a joke. Like
I mean, it was only
joke,
6 episodes. Like it wasn't.
It's not a lot.
Yeah,
but
that
anyway.
DVD is one of my prized possessions of the complete series. It's so good.
It's two whole discs. Or is it one?
I think it's all on one disc. But I love all Naked Gun stuff. But if I pick a favorite, I think it's the TV show. I think that style of humor is just perfect for a TV show, and they nailed it.
And then the movies kind of do all bleed together to a point. 3, I think, stands out for me a little bit more, just because there are definitely some jokes in 3 that have aged poorly. We'll put it that way.
Okay. Is that the one that starts with the UN meeting, and there's like a representative from each country that are all dressed very stereotypically about the part of the world they're from?
I think that's 2.
Okay, so
3,
they're probably
3 is
all
the one where he's like in jail and like Anna Nicole Smith is in it. I don't know if you remember.
Okay.
Like and then he does that whole big finale at the Oscars where everyone tells him he looks like Phil Donahue.
What I'm getting from this is I need to rewatch all 3 movies.
Chris, I don't know that you've seen Naked Gun 33 1/3 at this point.
I'm starting to wonder, yeah.
But needless to say, there are funny things in it. There are things that have aged poorly, but that's true for a lot of stuff. But it's actually ironic to me, though, that he also goes on to direct an episode of Angie Tribeca. So he actually got in at the very end of the Police Squad run and then contributed to Angie Tribeca, which very similar. Very similar. So very much in that vein. I wouldn't say it's like a successor to it, but that first season especially really playing in that area. Also was an executive producer and directed 7 episodes of the Stephen Amell vehicle Heels, the wrestling show. Don't know if you ever...
I still haven't tuned into that. Pretty good?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you can get past Stephen Amell. But, sorry, folks. He also directed My Fellow Americans, which is a movie my parents really like. Which is a movie that is definitely of its time, and I could never see it getting made today. Not for any controversial reason. It's just about a former Democratic president and a former Republican president that end up caught in the middle of a conspiracy and end up on the run together, but is somehow a road comedy, and it stars James Gardner and Jack Lemmon. It was supposed to be Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau in another movie, but Walter Matthau couldn't commit to the schedule, so they got James Gardner instead.
I mean, just imagine if they made that movie today, and it's a comedy, and it's 2 fictional characters, but the fictional Democrat's based on Bill Clinton, and the fictional Republican is based on Donald Trump. No one would see it because everyone would be like, I can't see that person in a comedy, like I can't laugh at anything about that. It would eliminate everyone.
It is definitely a product of its time. Does also oddly feature Bradley Whitford in one of his prominent I'm going to be a real jerk performances. But anyway, quite the career for Peter Segal. Didn't quite realize what all he'd gotten up to, but still out there doing stuff, so good for him.
Well, Andrew, I think it's time. It's time that we dive into this movie, talk about everything we like, all the positives of Tommy Boy. Andrew, you ready?
Yeah.
After finally graduating college, Tommy Callahan feels like he's finally able to take over the family auto parts business. But when his father suddenly passes away and the company finds itself on the verge of being sold, Tommy suddenly has the weight of hundreds of jobs on his shoulders. With the help of his father's former assistant Richard, the pair embark on a nationwide trip to sell enough brake pads to save the business. But unbeknownst to the duo, Tommy's stepmother is working against them. Got a snake in the grass here, Andrew. We're gonna talk about it. We're gonna dive into it. We got another comedy to dissect, and I don't know if we said it on the episode last week, but comedies are the trickiest things I find to talk about on the podcast, because I try not to fall into the trap of just reading you all the lines that I think are hilarious. But if we talk about the positives of a movie and it's a comedy, that's kind of what it comes down to. But we're going to find some stuff to break down here. But before we get to all that, we're going to talk, of course, about the cast, starting with the high point, best casting, best performance of the movie, because every episode we recognize one person who goes so far above and beyond the call of duty that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance, and we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, kick us off. Who is getting your Mark Strong Award for Tommy Boy?
It's Chris Farley. Like, anybody, like, you can't give it to anyone else. Like, you can't.
1,000%.
Give it to someone else, you're lying to me. Like, I'm not trying to be rude, but like, you 100% are lying to me if you say that this Mark Strong goes to anybody but Chris Farley. This movie,
more so, Billy Madison was an Adam Sandler vehicle, and I did give him the Mark Strong Award, but I wasn't all surprised by, you going with the villain of that piece. So this is very similarly a vehicle, but he's so far, like, it's the Chris Farley show. I don't know. This is my long-winded way of saying I agree with you, even more so than some other examples. Yes. A comedy vehicle for an actor, especially an SNL alum, is not rare, but rarely are they so clearly like the Mark Strong Award or the highlight or the driving force of a movie than Chris Farley is here in Tommy Boy.
Mm-hmm. That's essentially my point. Like, Adam, and it's like you said, it's almost more so. Or I would say more so than Billy Madison, because it is this movie. Like I said, Billy Madison doesn't really work without Adam Sandler, but this movie 100% doesn't work without Chris Farley. Like, 200% doesn't work without Chris Farley. It's what it's made for. It's a movie designed solely and specifically for Chris Farley to be a breakout star.
Yes,
and that's its only purpose. And it comes out the same year. And oddly enough, Chris Farley, as we established last week, uncredited in Billy Madison. So
that is weird to think about. He's that's the same year as his big starring role, and he's this random guy that shows up.
Yeah. I mean, in Wayne's World, I don't know that he's credited in either of the Wayne's Worlds either. But
Coneheads, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he was uncredited there, and he's,
I think he is credited in Coneheads because he is in that one a little bit. I don't know. Anyway. But this is just, it's his movie. It's his performance. It's his character. And it's Chris Farley. It feels weird to say this, but like, all the stuff you liked him doing on SNL, he does it here. He 100% is doing the physical comedy. He's doing the weird ranting. He's doing like the angry outbursts. Like, he's got it all. He's doing everything that you expect him to do. But yet this time around versus something where he's like the bus driver, where he's just kind of unlikable in general. He is here. There's still a wholesomeness to the character, and you're still rooting for this character. Like, obviously, you want Chris Farley to succeed at what he's doing in this movie, and you're just rooting for him. And it taps into just that. There was this. It feels weird to say innocence about Chris Farley when obviously the circumstances of his death and everything like that showed that he had addictions and problems that he battled, but there was still a wholesomeness to his performance, especially here. And definitely in Black Sheep. Like, in Black Sheep, like, he's definitely somebody who really is just trying to do the right thing and just ends up getting caught in the middle of stuff. But here, it's, again, he's trying to live up to this legacy that his dad has established, being this master salesman. And he just doesn't feel up to the task until he just finds that he has to do it his way, not his dad's way. And it's good. It doesn't work without him. Like, obviously, if Billy Madison stars anybody but Adam Sandler, it probably doesn't work either. But this one, more than anything, like, if this movie is not starring Chris Farley, like, why even bother?
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have a writing credit, and I'm not sure how these, like, a lot of Chris Farley specific things find their way into the movie, though, whether it's not because it's written by people that know him and have worked with him, or it's stuff that he added and didn't, get credit for. Because I'm pretty sure, like, fat guy in a little coat, I'm pretty sure he's doing that, like, on stage with Second City. I know even, like, his motivational character started way back then, so, like, there's so much of him in this movie, they just become synonymous with one another, and he's just such an easy layup for Mark Strong Award because, of course, he is. It's the whole purpose of this thing. It's Jim Carrey and Ace Ventura. Like, they are the driving force of all the comedy. And I guess now is as good a time as any to say this, but like in comparison to Billy Madison, Tommy Boy has a heart to it that Billy Madison does not. And I don't even mean that as an insult to Billy Madison, because I don't think Billy Madison is trying to reach for anything deeper emotionally. I think its only purpose is to make you laugh and respect. I have respect for any comedy that does that. The only purpose of Billy Madison, the only thing it's trying to do is make you laugh. Whereas Tommy Boy, first and foremost, I want you to laugh, but it's got this emotional core underneath. And Chris Farley is so good. You talk about that innocence. He's so good at playing that. He's so good at playing this vulnerability and this sadness that comes through sometimes. And it's never overwhelming. It's never driving you to tears, but it's there and it's believable. And he was so good at it. So whether it's his relationship with his dad in this movie or his friendship that he develops with Richard over the course of the film, he excels at it. And that's what's separates this movie from Billy Madison in my mind. And you got to owe it to Chris Farley and his performance. And we've talked about him, he was going to be Shrek, and he was working on that when he passed away. And there's audio you can hear of him playing the role of Shrek, which of course sounds nothing like the way Mike Myers eventually does it. But on the one hand, you listen to it and it's like, yeah, that clearly that's just Chris Farley. But it's Chris Farley doing a performance, and him putting that heart into that character, it would have been something. It would have been a totally different movie. Who knows, more successful, less successful, we'll never know. But I can totally see him stepping to the ogre shoes or doing a voice role and being able to convey that heart to an animated movie. I can see
Chris Farley doing a live action Shrek. Like, that's the kind of what's so ironic to me about Shrek is that movie basically got recorded 3 times. Because Chris Farley almost finishes it. And then Mike Myers apparently records a version that's largely just similar to Chris Farley, where it's just Mike Myers' voice. Yeah. And then at some point during that second record, Mike Myers had the brilliant idea to
start over and make it Irish.
Start over
or Scottish.
The Scottish accent, yeah.
Yeah. Which I love that it was his idea. He was like, you know what, guys? This whole performance I just did, which the director was presumably happy with, he's like, no. Mm-hmm. He needs a Scottish accent, and it ends up being the right call, I guess. Yeah. It gives them, some form of an identity. But yeah, you're right. The amount of money they must have spent to re-record all that, but
and now we're getting Shrek 5, so apparently it worked.
Yeah, turns out
with two Puss in Boots spinoffs, the second of which was surprisingly good. I was shocked.
I keep hearing that, but I have not watched it. It's hard for me to wrap my head around that being good, but.
I had the same thought, so don't worry.
Okay. I love Chris Farley. Andrew, have you heard Adam Sandler's song about Chris Farley? The first time I heard that was I actually watched Adam Sandler's Netflix special that it was on, and I had no idea about the song that he ends the special with. And so, like, out of nowhere, there's this emotional gut punch at the end of that show. And it's really something special. Like, it's one of the best things I've ever seen Adam Sandler do. It's such a special song. It's funny, and it's truthful and honest and heartbreaking. And every now and then, like every 6 months, I'm like, I kind of want to hear that song, and I just play it. And I did it recently because we're doing SNL-ish month, and we're talking about these guys. And I was literally walking through a grocery store with my earbuds in. I played it, and I'm like crying as I
Why would you do that?
I don't know. I had it popped into my head, and I was like, yeah, I gotta listen to this.
I don't know.
It is he does it in that special. He's performed it live a few times. He did it on SNL. All the versions are slightly different musically, but the lyrics are the same. And if you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend checking it out because it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, because it's because there's a version he does on SNL that's just like acoustic. That version on the special I think is like all electric, and he's done it a bunch of different times. But it's one of those moments where like we talked about it last week to a degree. Adam Sandler is just such an interesting person, I guess, just because there's moments where like you can clearly tell that his idea of making a movie is just gathering up a bunch of his buddies, going to some foreign locale where they all get to hang out for 3 months and shoot a movie and have a good time. And then he'll turn around and do something like Uncut Gems, which is an insanely stressful movie. Now, I don't know that it's his performance specifically that's making it stressful or the movie itself, but obviously his performance is part of that. And then you're just kind of like, oh, all right, like I guess there is a little bit more under the hood than maybe we realized. And then he'll flip around and do something like that Chris Farley song where you can tell that this is clearly something that's like deeply emotionally affected him at the time, and something that you don't realize as plebeians like us. We don't realize the impact that these things kind of can have on people because we just kind of throw them into this other category. Like, oh, you're rich, you're famous, you're fine. Like this stuff just, go cry into your piles of money type thing. Not that cynical and cold-hearted all the time, but just like it's difficult for us to identify with things like that. But imagine just having somebody like Chris Farley that you hung out with every day for years, and then suddenly he's gone. And you spend the next 20 years spending the whole time kind of wishing that he was just still there. If nothing else. Doesn't need to be anything else except just there. And everybody experiences that, but you detach it a little bit from famous people just because we already kind of detach them.
Yeah.
And I have to stop talking about this or I'm going to start crying. So,
I mean, I agree
it's a wild thing, but it also speaks heavily to just how important Chris Farley was to these people and how losing him, like Adam Sandler, I don't think ever implied the existence of that song until that special, which was full on 20 plus years after Chris Farley passed. Like, it's so it speaks deeply to how heavily that still hits it. And yeah.
One last emotional gut punch just while we're here as we transition to the next actor we're going to talk about. But I remember just kind of speaking to like moments like this, humanizing celebrities. I remember reading that David Spade did not attend Chris Farley's funeral because it was too difficult for him. And I remember reading that forever ago and just being like, man, like I can relate to that on some level. I haven't lost a good friend again. It's not a 1-for-1, but it's such a human reaction and feeling. Whereas we're all like, man, Chris Farley, I loved his work. It's a shame we don't get any more of it. But then he has like close friends that are losing someone. It's a totally different level. But David Spade, synonymous with Chris Farley during this time. Of course, he's in this movie. He plays Richard. He's the Weasley foil to Chris Farley. He plays this role just so damn well. He's great. He's almost, I don't know if underrated is the right word, but like it can be easy to take him for granted because all the big laughs are served up for Chris Farley, but you need that like other scene partner, tennis player, the foil, whatever you want to call him, to make most of these jokes work. And David Spade plays that part to perfection. He's not trying to steal the big laugh or steal the spotlight or anything. He knows what his role is here, and he's absolutely fantastic at it. And you get that great visual of the skinny, nerdy guy, and then like the big, energetic Chris Farley. The two of them on screen, just visually, their energy is just so perfect together. And of course, they do it again on Black Sheep, but again, this is like the crown jewel of that era and that dynamic. And I got to give David Spade a lot of credit for being able to play that role as well as he does.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me a little bit of like pro wrestling. Like, there's a term in wrestling, and I don't mean this backhandedly. I apologize if I think it that way, but you talk about like the jobber to the stars, like somebody who was never the guy, but was somebody that you trusted to make the guy look good. You can look at people like it's controversial to say this, but Triple H was always kind of like that. Like Triple H was never the man in the sense that, he was never the face of the company. Not like The Rock or Stone Cold were, but if you needed a foil for The Rock or Stone Cold and needed to get them to have a really great program, Triple H was the guy you trusted to do that. You look back in the 80s, the 90s, you had plenty of guys like that, where their job was not so much to be the star, but to make the star look as good as possible. And that's a little bit how I view David Spade here, where obviously Chris Farley is the star of the show, and David Spade's job is to make him be as funny as possible. And he is up to that task in spades. Sorry.
Nice. He does have some of my favorite line readings as well. And
he does.
We'll get to those when we get to scenes. Andrew, honestly, those are the two main characters. That's kind of it. There are other supporting actors. We're going to talk about them, but man, it's a big drop off from screen time wise and character wise from those two to everyone else we are going to talk about here. But I definitely want to shout out Brian Dennehy as Big Tom, as Tommy Boy's dad, because he's only in obviously the first quarter of the movie before he passes away. But unlike Billy Madison, where the dad is ready to not give it to the son because he sees he's a screw up, he is still optimistic about his kid. It took him 7 years to get his degree. It should have took him 4 years, but he's just happy that he passed. And even if he's not handing over the keys to the kingdom right away, he still feels in his heart that his son is going to be able to step up when the time comes. They have such a great relationship together. He calls his son on stage to sing a song with him at the big wedding party. It's great. There's not a single sense of a strained relationship here, which I think is special and nice to see. And you got to credit both players here in that relationship for bringing that to life. So shout out to Brian Dennehy for that.
Oh, absolutely. Like you said, this is a dad who still believes in his son. And there's moments where he looks at him and he's like, "All right, Tommy, come on." When they're in the factory and he's dodging the hooks that are coming across, and he looks back and you can see he's got that face of just all right, Tommy, come on. But even still, he still smiles at him and he's like, "All right, come on, you rascal, let's go find your office here." It's a really good performance. Like you said, it's very wholesome, but also just in that short amount of time that he's on screen, you do sense the weight of that character in relation to Tommy. They make sure to give you a bunch of scenes of him being that master salesman with these people, selling these things, pitching these things, turning people around and getting them onto his side, doing all of that. They 100% sell that extremely well in the first 15, 20 minutes of this movie that make that weight that Tommy has to live up to all the heavier. And that is a impressive thing to do with that short a time of a performance. So yes, definitely shout out to Brian Dennehy. Also, rest in peace. He passed away in 2020 of a heart attack. So rest in peace.
Julie Warner plays Michelle, who works at the factory and has known Tommy for seemingly his whole life, as most people in this town. And she definitely has a soft spot for him. It turned romantic at the end, but it's not a driving force throughout most of the movie. She seems to just see the good in Tommy, even when some people just see a screw up. I really love this character. I really love this casting because she works in the factory. She has an important job. She's handling the invoices. She's an integral part of this business, and she pulls off the blue collar middle class worker role super well. Sometimes they cast, especially when it's going to be a romantic lead in a movie, they cast someone in a role like this where you look at that person and you're like, you would never work in that place. But I think she brings a believability to the role that I think is hard to find in a lot of roles like this, and ends up being a fully, well-rounded character. She's great at her job. She helps save the day at the end of the day. if she just had a conversation with a woman that has a name, we would pass the Bechdel test. But I don't think we quite get there. But regardless, still a great character and brought to life really well by Julie Warner.
Yeah, like I said, a little limited just because so much of the movie ends up just following Chris Farley and David Spade. But when she is on screen, she's very believable. You can tell that it feels like there's a relationship between these characters. Like, obviously, that's something in movies that can feel inauthentic, where like you have these characters that have supposedly known each other their whole lives, but it's the most awkward interaction you've ever seen. Where with this, there's still an awkwardness, but it's because you can tell that like Chris Farley likes her, that he's never really acted on this, and now he's like kind of in this awkward moment of like, maybe if I save the factory, we can, and so anyway, that all comes across very believable. Like you said, she does a fantastic job, but she's basically the only female protagonist in this movie. That exists, for lack of a better way to put it. The only other woman in this movie is Bo Derek, and she's not nice. I don't know if those characters.
Well, there's another woman in this movie, Andrew. That's probably nice. I don't know.
We're right. Moving on.
Dan Aykroyd's in this movie, and he doesn't really show up too strong until the final quarter of the movie, but he is a welcome presence there. This is one of like the defining Dan Aykroyd performances for me, because I didn't grow up watching much Ghostbusters, but I definitely watched a lot of Tommy Boy, and his Chicago accent. If I think Chicago accent, I think of Dan Aykroyd in this movie. And Andrew, you would know more than me. Dan Aykroyd, I'm just going to assume Dan Aykroyd is actually from Chicago.
He's Canadian.
He's Canadian. My God. Okay, that's irrelevant. The question I wanted to ask you is this a comical, exaggerated Chicago accent, or is this about on par?
It's exaggerated, because he drops it at one point, doesn't he? Like, doesn't he just at one point drop the character and he just kind of talks to him and he doesn't really have... He's definitely playing it up. Like, he's definitely playing it up. Like, I don't think, like, you think of, like, the SNL, like, the super fans, they're also, like, playing it up the way they talk sometimes. Like, yeah, it's always played up for exaggeration. But Dan Aykroyd has spent a lot of time in Chicago. I'm certain he knows what one sounds like, so I would assume this is more authentic than most, though. He
had to come out through Second City Comedy Troupe, so, okay. In Toronto and Chicago. So
I was going to say, there is a Second City in Canada, too.
Okay, interesting.
But speaking of Dan Aykroyd, this brings an interesting question to me. Obviously, we're not talking about movies like this because they have success. They were critically well-received and made money at the time. But would you consider Ghostbusters to be an SNL-ish movie?
Interesting, because
Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd.
Well, Bill Murray was never a cast member, right? He just hosted a lot?
Yes, he was.
He was a cast member?
He was absolutely a cast member.
I don't remember. Andrew, I am not an SNL expert. I think we made that clear.
I don't think you need to be an expert to know that Bill Murray was a cast member of SNL.
I guess I was thinking of Steve Martin. Steve Martin was never a cast member. Yes. He just hosted so much that he is in that group. Okay.
Yes.
Sure. Okay. So you have two actual SNL alum, and it comes after they're both known. Yeah, definitely after they're both known for the work. Is it SNL-ish? I don't consider it one, but I'm not really sure why I don't.
I was in the same boat, and I found a caveat. If Eddie Murphy had played Winston, then I think it's definitely SNL-ish.
Just kind of becomes inescapable at that point.
Because Eddie Murphy plays Eddie Murphy. And I don't mean that in a backhanded way, but like the energy he has on SNL comes to that character. Whereas, like, I don't know that there's a specific energy that Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray had on SNL that just translates to their performances in a film. Like, when you watch Billy Madison, you're watching Adam Sandler do the things he did on SNL. But also, I think part of that is that, like, we know what Adam Sandler did on SNL. And like Chris Farley on SNL, we know what Chris Farley did on SNL. We know what Andy Samberg did on SNL. Like,
but we weren't watching the Dan Aykroyd era.
Things, but that era. So it's very possible that they are acting like the characters they did on SNL. I haven't watched the early seasons in a long time. Bill Murray is probably in the ballpark. That sardonic prick is kind of what his character was. But I just had that thought of like, oh wow, like it's two prominent former SNL cast members and starring in a movie. I don't know why it wouldn't be. Blues Brothers would be the same way, where like John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd, both prominent SNL stars, but
Well, didn't they do the Blues Brothers characters on SNL?
So it's just an SNL movie. I'm sorry.
Yeah, there you go.
But even then, like calling it an SNL movie feels weird. Like I don't know why, but just no. Ghostbusters was the one in my head where I think if Eddie Murphy were in it, you definitely would draw that line to SNL more. But I think.
Well, I'm curious what people at the time thought when they saw the trailers for Ghostbuster. Were they like, hey, these are the SNL guys? I think they're movie stars now. Like, what is that? Was that the tone at the time? I'm really curious. We got to find some old people.
They'd both gone on to like they'd both done other movies before. Like obviously Dan Aykroyd had done Blues Brothers, Bill Murray had done stuff like Stripes. So like they had both done other movies before. So it's yeah, I don't know.
Bo Derek plays Beverly. This is the woman that marries Tommy's father just before he passes away. And we come to find out that the marriage, I should say, was a bit of a sham, a con. She is actually trying to get the company for herself. She has an accomplice we'll talk about here in a moment. But Bo Derek gets one of the classic movie shots of a woman coming out of a pool in slow motion wearing a bikini. I mean, it's almost countless the amount of times we've seen that shot in a movie, especially in comedies of the 80s and 90s.
The old Fast Times at Ridgemont High, yeah.
But there's more to the character than just being a trophy wife. As I said, she ends up being kind of our main villain, or at least one of them. So we get a little bit of turn to the character. But playing the part well. I mean, I was trying to learn more about Bo Derek, other than just having a perfect baseball player name. I was trying to see, like, is she a prominent, like, model or a movie star? I feel like I know the name, but I don't know. What's your read on Bo Derek, Andrew?
Started off doing like child modeling, but then like moved into deciding to do acting. And she was cast in a movie in 1972 that was directed by her future husband, John Derek. So it's acting is definitely something that is something that she was doing early on. She definitely got a prominently acknowledged for her looks and became something of like a sex icon after she was in the film 10, which was a Blake Edwards romantic comedy starring Dudley Moore, Julie Andrews, and a host of others. What's the tactful way of saying this? If you're interested in seeing more of Bo Derek, I recommend watching 10. And I mean that in the quite literal sense. If you smell what I'm stepping in. But,
okay, got it.
So I think stuff like that definitely presents her as more of like I don't know what the nice way of saying this is, but she definitely got a reputation for her appearance throughout the 70s into the 80s, to the point that kind of became the gag. You know, like in a movie like this, when Bo Derek gets out of the pool, you're supposed to be like, whoa, that's Bo Derek. Which, is what all our parents thought, not what we thought, because we had no idea who Bo Derek was. But yeah, there's a lot of pieces to it. But it is primarily born out of acting, it seems.
And then there's the character that we are told is her son, which would make him Tommy Boy's stepbrother. But we eventually realize they are actually married and in on this con. That would be the character of Paul, played by Rob Lowe. Interesting role for Rob Lowe, because he's known as, super attractive sex symbol of the time, but there's like no point in this movie where his attractiveness is played up. There's even a scene where like his shirt gets ripped off, and it's supposed to be like, that's so embarrassing for you. Not like, wow, look at this guy.
It's not like you're chiseled out of marble or anything.
Yeah, even though he's got nothing to be embarrassed about. He's got a lot of like wacky slapstick type comedy
like
in this
Looney
movie.
Tunes-esque stuff, yeah.
Uncredited, which I think is interesting, but what I really find interesting is like Rob Lowe, like in the 80s, he's like an up and coming movie star. You know, he's like in the Brat Pack and like a almost leading man. But for some reason, you go from the 80s to the early 90s. Now all of a sudden he's taking bit parts in comedies like Wayne's World or Here, where it's almost like he's trying to like repair his public image by showing that he can make fun of himself and be lighthearted. I don't know what happened.
I really
between
was glad
his...
you went somewhere with that, because I was about to be like, Chris, for the love of God. I was about to be like, you gotta be kidding me.
Don't know what happened between that run of movies in the 80s and these early 90s comedies that would make him make that shift. But at any rate, he's done a lot of comedic work, continued throughout his career, Austin Powers movies, then on through TV shows like Parks and Rec. Typically a fan of the work this guy is doing.
Yeah. Here his job is, it's interesting because there's a bunch of reasons out there that I've seen. And by a bunch of reasons, I mean I googled this before we started recording. But one thing said that he had taken a starring role in the version of The Stand that was in production at the time, and that kind of prohibited from being billed in other films, which is not an uncommon thing. Like if a studio, especially at the time, was banking on being like, hey, we've got this person in this movie, they didn't want them getting billing in other movies. Rob Lowe himself kind of implied that the movie was going to center on his character and Tommy a little bit more, possibly kind of be a road trip about them specifically. And in that regard, he wouldn't have had an issue, but when they pulled the character back and kind of just made him a almost Wile E. Coyote-esque foil, he just wanted it to be a nice surprise, although I don't know that anybody watching a movie in 95 would go, oh wow, Rob Lowe, what a nice surprise. Like, I don't think that's what anybody was thinking at the time, but because this is like post Wayne's World. Like, this is we've already seen Rob Lowe. It's odd though that he seemed like, I do believe Rob Lowe is younger here than he is as his character in Wayne's World. Like in Wayne's World, the way he presents himself, he just feels like
as
a
an
30s
executive
businessman, and here he just feels like a mid-20s kind of slacker. It's so prominent, acting, I guess, but yeah, it's whatever the reason ends up being. Like you said, he's got mostly just sabotage type stuff he's doing here, trying to stop Tommy from succeeding. Some of which succeeds, some of which doesn't work. He gets mauled by a dog at one point. He goes through some stuff in this movie. Loses his shirt, as we established. Because getting mauled by a dog and losing your shirt, those are definitely on the
par.
Same vein. So
yeah, I think that covers our main players and then some in this movie. I think we can just talk about the scenes of this film, and of course, we're going to start with the best scene of the movie, or at least our personal favorite. So, Andrew, in your opinion, when is this film firing on all cylinders, and what is the best scene in Tommy Boy?
This is one of the scenes that I think sticks in my head the most, but it's probably Tommy's first attempt at doing a sales pitch. It's they go back and forth. They're talking to this executive. I don't remember who he's with or even what city it's in, but they kind of are talking, and he ends up using the model cars on this guy's desk to illustrate this kind of this new brake pad that they have, which is the whole purpose of this. He's got a brake pad division that he's thinking will save the company, and they're trying to sell those brake pads while trying to essentially infringe on almost a monopoly currently held by Dan Aykroyd's character, Zelensky. And which sounds like they took all of the last names of the Ghostbusters and merged them together. But
okay.
You know what I'm talking about, though. It's not that wrong. But it's anyway, so Tommy takes these cars and he starts giving this like unhinged stream of consciousness rant about this man's family getting into this brutal car wreck if they don't use his company's brake pads. And I won't try to do a Chris Farley impression of any of this, but it just keeps increasingly going more and more grotesque and rude, to the point where like the one thing is like he's like, and then the ambulance pulls up and the paramedic gets out and he's like, oh my god, and just everything goes horribly wrong. He sets one of the model toys on fire at one point to really illustrate that everything's gone terribly wrong. And he's like, and all of that just because you want to save a couple extra pennies. Like he just.
I want to say in the story, like one of the paramedics that arrives on the scene is new to the job and has trouble stomaching, like what you can see. Like there's so much detail.
Yeah, he's just so needlessly specific. Oh my God, we're burning alive! No, I can't feel my legs. It's just going on and on about this horrific brutalization of this man's family for buying the wrong brake pads, and then finally the guy's like, get out. And that's the last thing Tommy says is, do you validate? And the guy just goes, no, and throws him out. And it's just the perfect encapsulation of that, like, unhinged Chris Farley energy that part of the reason that you've come here, it's what you're looking for. And it's just, to me, that's what probably the scene that sticks out in my head the most is just Chris Farley lighting a toy car on fire while going, oh my God, we're burning alive.
I love, there's no point in trying to recreate the scene because I can't do it justice, but it just, the beginning of it, he does an example of, if you're using our brake pads and the toy car stops, he goes, woof, that was close. And he goes, this is the other guy's brake pads, and just goes 0 to 60 and just says, I can't stop. He just screams and then it's just off to the races from there. But that immediate jump to just over the top. And what I really like about it is kind of bring it back to like this movie having a heart. Is he talks about this later in the movie, like when it comes time to try and make the sale, he always ruins it because he gets too excited, and it's his nervousness that's leading him to do this. To me, this is so key because it's not that he's a man-child playing with toys and getting too excited. He's just nervous in a high-pressure situation, and he understands the gravity of what's going on, So, like, the end result might be the same way. You have, like, the man-child we've seen a million times who just doesn't care about anything or anyone and just wrecks shop. But the fact that his motivation is, like, his nervousness and, again, the weight of what he's doing, it just adds a dynamic so that you can laugh during the scene, but then really feel for him that he actually lost the sale and it mattered and it has weight. It's just that then this isn't a super emotional movie. I don't want to oversell this, but that layer is so important because it informs all the comedy. It gives everything purpose, and it's a very, very key ingredient. And of course, Chris Farley is great at playing every level of this character. So, Andrew, that's a great pick. I do love that scene. I'm really struggling with this. I don't know what singular scene to pick out as my favorite. I mean, what I quoted the most as a kid was certainly the gas station scene when he breaks the car door, then David Spade walks out and tries to open the door and it falls off, and he just goes, "What'd you do?" That line is something that I have said many, many times.
It's so good because, like, I love, like, the look down beforehand, like the very sharp. Yeah. What'd you do?
I gotta sell the shock of this. I didn't see it coming. It's maybe the most iconic scene. It's like that and the deer. You can tell what the most iconic scenes are because this movie's been released on home video so many times that there's been so many changes to the cover where they try to incorporate a thing I hate, where they try to incorporate like the iconic scene into the DVD cover to sell more copies. I remember there was a DVD that was him holding the car door, which he never did on the actual poster. And I believe it was called the Holy Schneitskys edition of the movie because it had like Holy 20 extra seconds. Schneikes. I'm sorry, did I mispronounce my catchphrase? Apologies.
Like put a T in there, sorry.
Schneitskys. Yeah. Anyway, I hated that era of DVDs. I remember I had an Airplane, a copy of Airplane on DVD that was like the auto edition. It had like the automatic pilot like on the cover. Like it's just this dumb marketing thing just to get you to buy another copy of the movie. At any rate, I think for my favorite scene, I'm gonna jump to one of our final scenes. I like Tommy really kind of finally saving the day, coming face to face with Dan Aykroyd. But specifically, I love the tour through Dan Aykroyd's it's almost implied that entire building belongs to him, but at least several floors of that skyscraper, because he doesn't just have like an office. He has an entire car parts testing facility inside this skyscraper where you see the sandbags dropping repeatedly on the car seats to see how they hold up. You have classic crash test dummies slamming into a wall. Andrew, crash test dummies really had a time in the 90s, did they not?
I mean, there was a whole animated toy franchise, Crash Test Dummies.
I remember the toys. There was a band.
Yes. We really made those a thing.
I feel like
we really made auto safety dummies a thing. Like, it's kind of wild.
To the point where it felt like, and then like, yeah, everyone does crash test dummies. It's how they test cars and stuff. Where I would guess a young person today doesn't have a concept of a crash test dummy the way we did. But
right.
At any rate, I like this scene a lot because I loved seeing all this stuff as a kid. And I don't know why, I love the joke where the fan blows David Spade's hairpiece off and then he's just super nervous about it. Don't tell anybody about this. I don't know. This deep in the movie, finding out that he's bald is a really funny joke to me.
Well, I love that it's like clearly they've made him fake bald because like David Spade's not bald even now. So like, like it's clearly a wig falling off a bald cap to make it look like he's bald.
And then he haphazardly puts it back on and it just looks really crappy. It's a very funny visual gag to me.
He just looks fine.
Yeah, and then like Michelle shows up a scene later and he says real quick in passing, "Don't tell her about my hair." Just keep it going. But yeah, I mean, there's so many scenes I could pick as my favorite. There's this movie is hilarious and I very much enjoy it. But the visuals of this scene, there's some scenes of this movie that have not stuck with me so much, and like the whole gag with them on the airplane. I mostly forgot about. But them being in this facility always stuck with me. I love the hairpiece gag, and I love that Tommy Boy. I keep on Tommy Boy like it's his name. I love that Tommy finally gets to save the day, and this is my favorite.
It's a great pick. The whole evolution of him getting to this scene is it because that scene I highlighted is like the beginning of Tommy as a salesman, where he's garbage at it. And you're putting out the scene where he finally like fully assumes the position, in like a literal way, where he's now like literally pulling one over on like the big corporate man. But like the two scenes in between are definitely some of my favorites too, where you've got the one at the restaurant where he manages to like get this woman to turn the fryer back on and make him chicken wings, even though the fryer's shut off and they're done with doing that. Like he still manages to succeed there. And that's when David Spade kind of clues in. He's like, "Hey, you pulled that off. Like that's something." And then the sequence where he makes the first sale. All of those sequences build to this finale so perfectly because you're just seeing his evolution as a salesman in real time. And that's the whole thing. He like you said, he realizes that what he can't do it the way his dad did. You know, well, what's one of the lines he says? I can get a good look at a T-bone by sticking my head up like, you know, he just says it all wrong the whole time. He's like, "I stick my head up a butcher's ass," but no. He's saying all these wrong things and realizes eventually he's like, "I can't say the things my dad said because that's not what works. That's not me." He can't just be his dad. And so that evolution he takes, that kind of progress through the movie, building to this scene with Dan Aykroyd, is just really well done. It's you buy it, you believe it, and then when he's there and makes it happen, you're rooting for him. You want him to succeed. And so this sequence is great. And it's a great pick. It's what the movie builds to, is Tommy saving the company and becoming his own version of his dad, basically. Dare I say, becoming his own man, not his dad.
You know, I said he becomes Tommy Man. I said that
Nice.
The car door is maybe the most iconic scene, but maybe it's the deer regaining consciousness in the car, or maybe it's him in the hotel putting on David Spade's coat, singing "Fat Guy in a Little Coat." I don't know. This movie has a lot of iconic scenes, but I'll talk about this hotel for a second. First off, when Tommy goes out to get some pizza, David Spade is looking down at a woman at the pool who, for some reason, decides to skinny dip in a hotel pool. Like, this does not happen. Why? What is that? She literally looks around to make sure no one's there, but there's hotel windows all around you. You're at a hotel. What are you doing? Windows,
it's lit up, and also I'm not given the vibe that it's 3 a.m. or anything. It's Tommy's going out looking for food. So it's clearly not insanely late. And also, someone just walked by. He did.
You're already in a bikini.
Is it already not 20 yards away when she's just it's time to take off this tiny swimsuit and swim naked?
Is it that much more comfortable to not be wearing the swimsuit? What is
maybe it's the rush. Maybe it's the rush of.
Maybe she wants people peeking. Maybe, yeah.
And she's just praying nobody calls the cops, and the cops go, "Well, cool, you're going on a list
now." This is, of course, a part played by Lori Bagley, who actually dated Chris Farley and has had some acting credits, but is mainly a model, I would say. So. No stranger to people ogling at her. There's a bit of an awkward scene, though, where David Spade is narrating what he's seeing, and it's implied that he is
gross.
Unzipping his pants when Tommy Boy walks in. Tommy Boy, I did it again. Tommy walks in on him, and he quickly
Tommy Man now.
Tommy, well, he's still Boy at this point in the movie, but he walks in. David Spade jumps back under the covers, and Tommy knows what he was doing and keeps making these jokes. I wonder if she goes out with one of the Yankees. There's a bunch of double entendre type jokes. And then they jump to 3 a.m. They're laying there in the dark. This is my favorite one. He goes, "Richard, who's your favorite little rascal? Alfalfa? Or is it Spanky?" And then there's this beat, and he just goes, "Sinner." And then the scene ends.
It is great. It is really great.
Sinner. It's such a silly contrived setup and a runner, but for some reason I'm calling it a sinner at the end of all of that. Just really
it
cracked me up.
It puts it on another level somehow, yeah.
I would say that scene, maybe it didn't age too well just because of how contrived it is. I don't think it's wrong or anything. You probably wouldn't do something like that today, but it's whatever. We get through almost this entire movie without any ooh, that didn't age well type moments until they are on the airplane and Chris Farley is demonstrating all the safety features. David Spade's on the intercom talking to the passengers and drops the R word as he's describing Chris Farley, which, look, when you judge a movie at the time through today's lens, it's wow, but that was really not a big deal at the time. In fact, I think we covered Godzilla, which comes out a few years after this, and they do the same thing there. It's wild how that word hits your ears now versus, look, 95, you bet I was using that word with my friends and stuff. I will fully as a kiddo, it's how it was at the time. The key is I don't lament the fact that we don't say it anymore. I feel like it's okay that we've grown as a society. It's a good thing, people, but it still can be shocking or jarring to go back and hear it used so casually.
It is. The one that always, I'm not going to, there's a great number of things that ultimately kind of were used as insults that you look back on and you're like, another big common 90s-ism and even into the aughts was just, if something was dumb, you called it gay. And it was wait, why? Why is that a go-to thing that we're doing? And so that's something else that hits me now too. I'll watch a movie and somebody will do that. And I don't recoil quite as much as this one because obviously it's all bad, but just I definitely have one oh yeah, that was a thing that we used to do and no one questioned it. Obviously even some much deeper, uglier homosexual slurs were used as casual insults back in the day. There's
an F slur in The Hangover, which is in the 2000s. Like, it's not that
the
old.
Bill and Ted movies are some of my favorites, but both of them drop the F word at least one point. Granted, that's 88 and 91 or something like that, which is, whatever, but it's definitely something where I'm like, oh, that really just used to be a thing. And this one, that was definitely a moment where I was like, it's definitely something where, like, in hindsight, you look back, and that one is specifically, the R word, definitely, like, when someone says that, like, it catches you in a pretty brutal way, which is, and yet that one is one that you will see people argue kind of, hey, I should be allowed to say that. And I'm like, you really don't need to. Like, the way we treat disabled people in this country is already bad enough. Like, look at the requirements you need to stay on, like, disability and things like that. Or if you get assistance for being disabled, like, you can't have more than a certain amount of money in your savings account. Otherwise, they're like, oh, you have money, and they cut your support. It's really awful how we treat disabled people in this country, folks. I'm not kidding at all when I say that. And so if we can grow as a people and just not say a word, it's literally the bare minimum. Literally, like, the smallest thing
nothing is lost. I mean, people are quick to be like, oh, you can't be funny anymore. Like, if that scene, if he called him an idiot, nothing is lost. It still works. It plays exactly the same. And we don't, ostracize an entire group of people.
Stupid, idiotic, moron, anything. Like,
although I let me see if I can make this point in a way that I'm not going to immediately just cut out of the episode. But it is very wrong to use these words, but some of them I feel like have almost come all the way back around where it's so wrong it can be used again. Like, Ken Jeong saying gay and community is really funny to me, and I don't find that use of it offensive in the way I would something from an earlier time, because I feel like it's full circle, but I probably only half mean what I'm saying there. But
I know the exact scene you're talking about, and I also find it very, very funny. But one of the things that makes that not work necessarily, but like, Ken Jeong's character is not nice. Like, he's not like he's not saying this out of like any sense of nobility or anything. Like, he's a character that you are not rooting for, and is notoriously known for like how mean-spirited he is. And so him saying it, like, it's not meant to be like, okay. It's one of those things where like the character is not meant to be like,
the joke is on him, not who he's yelling at.
Right, exactly. And so, but his delivery of that is very, very good.
Speaking of that airplane scene, I love that, they sneak on the plane, they're dressed as flight attendants, and then they got to change back into the normal clothes before they land. There's this really dumb gag where, like, all in one shot, David Spade walks into the bathroom and 10 seconds later walks out completely changed in a possibly fast fashion. And he doesn't acknowledge that, but Chris Farley is staring at him, and his reaction, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. It all plays out silently on Chris Farley's face, but it's hilarious, fantastic, just reaction work. And then you get a great scene of Chris Farley in the bathroom himself, absolutely destroying it as he tries to change. But I love the little, almost subtle is not the right word, but again, it plays out silently. The dumb little joke of David Spade changing fast.
Yeah, it's a good one. And then Chris Farley obviously nearly crashes the plane trying to change in the bathroom.
I love, I mentioned David Spade does have some of my favorite comedic moments. I love when they're in that hotel room and Tommy's left the window open and he keeps complaining about the moths. And there's all these shots of like
these massive amounts of moths.
Yeah.
Like, where did they come from? Why are they here?
He's vacuuming them, like, literally at one point. And there's this one... I'm going to say what the line is. It's one of my favorites in the movies. It's not going to translate. If you haven't watched this movie recently, you probably won't even remember exactly what I'm talking about. But it's in it's in this hotel room. And Tommy's about to answer his phone. David Spade walks off screen and you hear him just go, "Can we get any more moths in here?" That's it. He's just complaining about the moths. And I was one of my biggest laughs watching this movie back was just that dumb little line about the moths. Can we get any more moths in
It's
here?
very good. And then the vacuum is like an old, like 70s vacuum. Like it's just such a ridiculous thing. It's wild. I love it. But no, you talk about how the covers of movie changes. The current Voodoo cover for this movie has the deer on it.
Yeah, it's like the three of them all stacked up.
It's like three of them all stacked up, which is like, it's so wild to me because like like that obviously is the destruction of David Spade's car is obviously played for great laughs. You mentioned it kind of starts with the door where he's just like, hang
on, it starts. It starts. You want to go way back to whenever he picks Tommy up from college.
Candy and the dashboard.
I love. Yeah, he turns and all the M&Ms go into his dash, and he goes, M&Ms. Oh, come on, damn it! Again, this isn't translating because that probably doesn't sound funny, but just the idea of just watching little
M&Ms
candies fall into your car was really fun. I don't know why these little things hit me really hard this go around.
It's all culminates together, man. But
yes,
starts there.
The car door,
but the progressive destruction of the car, like obviously that happens. The door is another thing where like he messes up the door, but manages, like he pries the door forward and then somehow manages to close it and make it look like there's no problem, which is not how that would work. But
let me tell you, my older brother, he's 4 years older than me, tried to or did sneak out of the house late at night with his first car, which is it might have been David Spade's car from this movie. I mean, which in 95 maybe would have been fine, but not in 2003 or whenever this is. So he's got an old beater. His plan is to roll it backwards out of the driveway and then start it in the street so my parents don't hear the car start up. And so he's got the door slightly ajar so he can turn his head and roll it backwards. And then he hit our basketball goal, which we have the legit basketball goal like in concrete, like it was a pole. Bends the car door completely the wrong way. To fix it, he shoved it back into place, which, as you're pointing out, does not look like it did before. He got a wire clothes hanger to wrap through the car door and the latch of the car, so it was permanently closed. And he would have to get in either through his window or through the passenger seat from that point forward, or until he eventually replaced the door with a car door from a junkyard, which was a completely different color than the rest of his car, but real classic first car type stuff. So yeah, I've seen this exact damage happen to a car before. Happened to my brother's car. Shout out Josh.
But to the point, you're absolutely not just closing it back and it's not going to look pristine.
No, it will never be the same.
He walks up to it. And then obviously you think he notices, but then he just sees like a little ding, and then he pulls the handle, and the door just falls straight off, and that leads to Chris Farley's, "What'd you do?" And obviously it continues throughout the movie. So the door is obviously hanging off. Eventually they have a genuine deer that they think they killed. They hit the deer, damaging the front of the car, and then they put the deer in the back of the car, and it turns out the deer's not dead, and it rips through the roof of the car, which is like a cloth top. So this car, and so by the end of this movie, there's like a cardboard door on the car. There's like duct tape over the top. Like it looks horrible, and it's genuinely like my dad always told me watching this movie. He's like, I can't believe what they did to that car. Like my dad loves classic cars, so anytime he watches a movie where they like destroy one, he's always just like, I cannot believe they did that. Like the first Fast and the Furious, towards the end, Vin Diesel's car gets hit by a train or something, or like crashes really bad, and my dad's just like, I can't believe they did this. Like he just has that reaction a lot. And this movie's definitely, he's like, can you believe? And I was like, I mean, it's a movie. He's like, can you believe? And I'm like, all right, we don't watch.
Has he watched Death Proof? You know?
No.
That might be a rough one for
my
him.
dad once told me, we were talking about Kurt Russell, and he said Kurt Russell did his best work in the Christmas Chronicles. To which I had to say
his best work, and this was said unironically, like your dad loves the Christmas Chronicles?
Because my dad loves the Christmas Chronicles, which, no shade, fun movie.
Look, that's fine, but it should be said that your dad has no young kids in the house. right?
That
He's
is
not
true.
watching this
Yes.
with young kids, with grandkids. Like, it's just him. This is just
He's just
his...
enjoying, him and my mom watching it and enjoying
Okay.
it.
I mean,
Now, I countered immediately by saying, no, Kurt Russell is at the peak of his powers in The Thing. That is Kurt Russell at the peak of his powers. But
Kurt Russell does get the
I-
Mark Strong Award in the Christmas Chronicles, and the best scene is him singing to escape prison. Is that
naturally.
escape jail? Okay, all right. As long as we're in agreement there.
Of course, yeah.
Okay.
Duh. Pshaw. But I said his best work was The Thing. And my dad was like, the Christmas Chronicles. And then my mom went, oh, wasn't he in The Computer That Wore Tennis Shoes? And I'm like, yeah, when he was like 15. So just a very wide spectrum.
The
of Kurt
Computer
Russell
That
appreciation
Wore
in my
Tennis
house.
Shoes?
Yes, Kurt Russell is a former child actor. I know we've probably discussed this before. He starred in a series of movies at Disney in 1966. He signed a 10-year deal with Disney when
I'm
he was
looking at a
15.
picture of him in The Computer That Wore Tennis Shoes, 1969, and he looks more like a man than I do now. Like, it looks like Kurt Russell's face.
He's like 20 there.
Yeah, what the hell?
Yeah. So anyway, wide appreciation of Kurt Russell in my house, I guess how I should describe it. But no, I do not believe he's seen Death Proof. But
So-
if I tell him Kurt Russell's in it, maybe he'll watch it.
The Thing, you would say, is the Kurt Russell's best performance, huh?
I really do like Big Trouble in Little China as well, because I think he's acting much more comedic in that one.
Sure.
Obviously, Escape from New York is a lot of people's favorite too, but for me, it's The Thing. And I do really enjoy Big Trouble in Little China, though. Like, I really do enjoy watching that.
Where does Captain Ron rank?
Number one. That
Okay.
was.
It just slipped your mind, but
that's-
now
yeah.
you recognize
No,
that.
I
As
was the commentary that Kurt Russell and John Carpenter did for Big Trouble in Little China. He said, John Carpenter says to Kurt Russell at one point, he's like, "This is my favorite performance of yours after Captain Ron." And Kurt Russell's like, "Oh, you never saw The Computer That Wore Tennis Shoes?" Or no. And he says, no, John Carpenter says at one point, he's like, I never saw the computer one. And Kurt Russell's like, you never saw The Computer That Wore Tennis Shoes? That was like Citizen Kane, John. Come on. Like, their commentary tracks are so wonderful because you could tell that they're just really old friends and there's all these in-jokes and things they talk about. But the Big Trouble in Little China one in particular is very, very fun. But yes, so maybe I can get my dad to watch Death Proof. Kurt Russell, who's not in this movie or has anything to do with it.
Who knows how we got here, Andrew? I look again. I don't want to just go through every single scene that I think is hilarious. So many of them are funny, but I got two last shout outs here. One, whenever Tommy's dad dies, there's some really cool camera work here because he falls to the ground. The camera is above looking down at him, and then one by one, all the family members crowd around and poke their head in, and then the shot reverses to the family members looking down at him seamlessly, but then it pulls back, and we see that we are now at his funeral. So it does a reverse shot as if it's in the same scene, but it's actually jumped forward to his funeral. That's great. You just don't expect to see things like that in a comedy like this. Always appreciate it. And lastly, there's a scene where Chris Farley and Rob Lowe go cow tipping and end up covered in mud, or as Rob Lowe implies, cow poop. And Rob Lowe sprays him off. So Chris Farley's getting sprayed, hosed down with water and starts jumping up and down singing, "I'm a maniac, maniac." I just want to say this is my reference point for that. If I did this as a kid, which I did for some reason, dance around and sing that song, I was referencing Tommy Boy, having no idea that he is referencing Flashdance, which
Yes.
have I seen? I don't know if I ever got around to watching Flashdance, so I'm probably still referencing Tommy Boy if I ever think of that. But that song, that dance, as far as I'm concerned, it's a Tommy Boy reference. Andrew, as you know, we end these shows the same way. That's a segment we call Ask Andrew, where I just bring a question on you, Andrew, and it can be about anything, and you have to answer it. We've had some fun with this. It's been some wide ranging questions, some hard hitting stuff. But here's what I want to ask you today, Andrew. Do you match your socks?
To each other?
Yes.
Yeah.
So like you do a load of laundry. When you're putting your laundry away, you put matching socks together and fold them together and put them in a drawer.
When I do fold my laundry, yes.
Sometimes it stays in the hamper until you just pick it out of the hamper to wear.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
I wash those clothes. I'm probably going to wear them all again.
When you put your clothes away, though, you match. So, how many different styles of sock do you think you have, Andrew?
Many.
Yeah? This is interesting
Almost
to me.
all the socks I have are different.
By choice.
Yeah.
Like, you just see a cool pair of socks at the store, you're like, oh yeah, I'll wear those.
Yeah.
I feel like, well, first of all, I think what you're telling me is normal. It's probably the norm. Personally, one of the first decisions I made as an adult, meaning I was living on my own and purchased my own clothes, was I got rid of all my socks and I bought only low-cut black Hanes socks. So that was probably when I was 18. So for, how old am I? 17 years now. I have only purchased one type of sock. It is a low-cut black Hanes. So I do not have to match them. My sock drawer is one type of sock. I just grab 2 socks and I've got a pair and I'm good to go. I guess I just hated matching socks that much as a kiddo, and it's the classic.
Yeah, that's like a visceral distaste.
There's like the bad stand-up joke where like you can always only find one sock and where's the pair and whatever, blah 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 blah. So I didn't want to deal with that, and I haven't for my entire adult life. I'm not saying I'm better than you. I'm not saying I'm smarter than you. I'm not saying that everyone should adopt this, make their lives easier. But I was just curious how.
Well, because I got socks from MeUndies for a really long time, and they're all themed. Like you buy like a matching set where the socks match the boxers and everything. Because
did you do so? Whenever you wear those socks, do you make it a point to wear the matching boxers?
Sometimes. I don't wear a whole lot of those anymore.
Okay.
Just because the quality, it was like anything else. Once they got like super big, the quality like took kind of a nosedive.
Sure,
like
yeah.
I have pairs I bought when I first started using it that are still fine. I have pairs and socks and stuff that I bought like not that long ago that are already, they fit differently. They don't fit as well. They've worn through way faster. Like, so I've started, but I still like, I get socks from like Pacas or something. And yeah, they're all different. And
do you ever wear
to
mixed?
me that, go ahead.
Oh, do you ever wear mixed match socks?
No.
Like, these aren't the same pattern, but what you always wear the pair. Okay, interesting.
To me, that makes matching them easy though, because it only has one match. Like, so it's not like it can only match to one other thing. So you just keep working through the pile, and eventually you're going to run out of stuff.
Interesting. Have you ever like lost one, like legit lost it? So you've had one sock by itself for like weeks, and you're like, all right, I got to give up. I got to get rid of this. You just throw it away. Move on with your life. Interesting.
I will like search a little while. Like obviously,
sure,
if it's still in the dryer or something, I'm not gonna. But like if it gets to be like a month and I've done several loads of laundry and I still don't know where the sock is, I'm like, all right, bye.
There was a time in my professional career where I wore suits every day, and so low-cut ankle socks wouldn't make sense. But
yes.
I wanted
That's
to
what I was going to ask. I was like, you never have like a long pants situation?
there's a style of Vans sock. It's a I don't even know what those are called. They go like halfway up your calf, but it's a black Vans sock. They're all black. They just say Vans in white at the very top. And I bought like, 3 sets of those or whatever. So that's my second type of sock. These days I don't wear suits anymore for work, but like if it's really cold outside and I need a taller sock, I'll grab a pair of those. But same thing, I don't got to match them because I just have one style.
Yeah. All my socks are I have some socks that are the same. because I have a bunch of different socks. I have crew socks. I think that's what you're talking about, the ones that kind of come like halfway up your calf.
Yes, crew sock. Yeah, thank you.
I have some ankle socks for in the summers when I wear shorts and stuff like that, the occasional time that happens. But then I have a bunch of socks I wear for hockey too. Like I have a bunch of specific hockey socks, but then I also just have like compression socks that I wear too that are helpful. So I have a lot of different types of socks, and
This
they're
is
all
this
different.
has been very interesting. I think you might be able to learn a thing or two about someone's personality by their sock situation. That's my running theory anyway. If you want to chime in on this hot discussion, let us know what your sock situation is. How do you handle this dilemma? Hop into our Discord if you aren't there already. There's a link in the show notes. I guess you can talk about movies and stuff there as well. You can look at the movies that we have coming up. Next week, it is going to be our last movie in the SNL-ish theme. We are talking about Hot Rod, a movie made by the Lonely Island guys while they were SNL cast members. It is not an SNL movie, but it is SNL-ish. This one I have not seen beginning to end. Andrew, I think you haven't either as of right now, correct?
No, I have not.
Not
as of now.
We'll be diving into that, and then after that, it's episode 200, which is going to be a big, huge extravaganza. Can't wait. But until then, just remember that maybe not every movie is great.
But all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can check him out on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. Check him out on Twitter at I'm a Bigger Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoy this episode, please share it with a friend. That's the only way they grow. Follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.
First time I saw him, he was sweeter than honey. Plaid jacket and belt too tight, and he wasn't even being funny. Then he cartwheeled around the room and slow danced with a cleaning lady. He was a one-man party. You know what I'm talking about my friend Chris Farley. On Saturday night, my man would always deliver. Whether he was the bumblebee girl or living in a van down by the river. He loved the Bears and could dance at Chippendales with Swayze. When they replaced his coffee with Folgers, he went full on crazy. The sexiest Gap girl and Meatloaf in the band. Without him there'd be no lunch lady in Lunch Lady Land. You know I'm thinking about my boy Chris Farley. After a show, he'd drink a quart of Jack Daniels, then stick the bottle right up his ass. But hungover as hell, that Catholic boy always showed up to morning mass. We tell him, slow down, you'll end up like Belushi and Candy. He said, those guys are my heroes, that's all fine and dandy. I ain't making that stuff up, that's the truth about my boy Chris Farley. I saw him in the office crying with his headphones on, listening to a Casey and the Sunshine Band song. I said, buddy, how the hell is that making you so sad? Then he laughed and said, just thinking about my dad. The last big hang we had was at Timmy Meadows' wedding party. We laughed all night long, all because of Farley. But a few months later the party came to an end. We flew out to Madison to bury our friend. Nothing was harder than saying goodbye. except watching Chris's father have his turn to cry. Hey buddy, life's moved on, but you still bring us so much joy. Make my kids laugh with your YouTube clips, oh Tommy boy, yeah. And when they ask me who's the funniest guy I ever knew, I tell them hands down without a doubt it's you. Yeah, I miss hanging out, watching you try to get laid, but most of all I miss watching you torture Spade. You're a legend like you wanted, but I still wish you were here with me, and we were getting on a plane to go shoot Grown Ups 3. Yeah, life ain't the same without you, boy, and that's what I'm singing about. I'm singing about my boy Chris Farley. And if we make enough noise, maybe he'll hear us. Give it up for the great Chris Farley.